So more for short.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, okay. All right. So Mo is a psychologist that's going to be taking us through the mental the impact of this quarantine on our mind. So that's what we're going to be talking about. Yeah, the impact of this quarantine. I'm not the only one. Somebody says Dio says maybe Dio also calls Mochi. I don't know. All right. All right. Bless you. Thank you guys for being here tonight. The Lord bless
All
you.
right, someone's commented about your jacket, so let's just address the jacket issue. Yes, I have one like that as well, by the way. So someone said I should get one like that. I do have one like that.
What's that? What's that?
Your jacket, which is the reason why you
My
were in
jacket.
the first instance.
Oh,
Yeah,
my jacket, right? What? Why are you stealing my thunder? Why? They said you like my
because you've
jacket.
been commented about a few times.
Why did you say you have one like that? Why did you say you have one like that? Just let
Why
it
not?
ride. Yeah,
Why
nice
not?
jacket. All right. Thank you, family. The Lord bless you. Okay, now, Mo, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Pee. Good evening, everybody. So, just by way of introduction, I'll just give you a brief background to who I am and what I do. So, as P said, I'm a psychologist. I specialize in forensic psychology, and I currently work as a clinical practitioner with a local authority in London. I work with them to deliver interventions and undertake assessments within the family and children's sector. And so I help to improve the psychological well-being and functioning of young people and their families in the local authority where safeguarding is a concern. As a private practitioner, I also undertake and I carry out risk assessments for family courts where safeguarding is a concern because of domestic violence. So essentially, my role and what I do is about looking at how families as a whole function and thinking about the impact of parental mental health and well-being on children and young people within the family home. Um, so today, I want the aim of the session is to essentially help you to understand what stress responses and anxiety responses we may have in the context of the pandemic and the lockdown, um, to help to understand what anxiety is and how it can manifest in adults and children, to help to understand the triggers and recognize those, and more importantly, to provide practical tools that you can use to help improve your mental health and well-being and maintain a healthy balance. So I'll start by explaining what anxiety is. Worry essentially is a way that we think as human beings. We constantly think ahead and we project and we plan and we sort of things need to make sense to us and we like things to fit into boxes. When those boxes don't fit, it can leave us feeling anxious and apprehensive. And when we worry about things and we worry excessively, we often come up with worst case scenarios that can then impact on how we're able to cope with things. So the caveat I would say is it's normal as human beings for us to have some level of worry in life. However, the problem becomes when it becomes debilitating and you worry to the level that you cannot no longer function in your everyday life. When worry becomes leads to anxiety where life as normal is problematic and difficult, that's an issue. And that's, those are things and triggers that we would be encouraging you to seek help with and having conversations with people. There's lots of things that can trigger worry and anxiety. So anything from, you know, things not being able to fit into boxes for us, like I said. So ambiguous things, open things, situations that are open to different interpretations and understandings for us that can make us anxious as human beings, that can make us worry. Novel and new situations. So if we don't have any experience to fall back on, if you've never been away before and you don't have any experience to fall back on to say, I've been through that, I know what to expect, that can raise the level of anxiety that we have and experience as human beings. And when things are unpredictable, and so when we experience things being unclear and there's no real certainty about how they're going to turn out, that also increases our level of anxiety as human beings. So when we're thinking about that in the context of the pandemic, um, right now with the health crisis, we don't know how things are going to turn out. We don't know how, we don't have a vaccine. This is a new strain of virus that's come through. So all of that in the context, and given the responses as well, sort of governmental responses, and when you think about the fact that it being a pandemic, it is globally impacting on it's a global impact, so it isn't even an isolated event. All of that put together can increase our anxieties as human beings and make us worry. And essentially, when we worry, like I said, we project and we start to think about worst case scenarios, sometimes consciously, sometimes subconsciously, but that's what happens. And when the worry compounds, it comes to a place whereby it takes over us and we feel crippled. And that's when we talk about it feeling fearful and really struggling to sort of see beyond. Um, so that's really what kind of in the context of the pandemic, what worry is. I talk about it in the context of the pandemic because actually what a lot of us are experiencing is very similar. So you'll have individuals in society that experience what we call anxiety disorders. That's very different to perhaps what globally most of us are experiencing now, because this is something that is not unique to one individual. We're all experiencing this at the moment. So um, naturally we're going to all have some level of elevated anxiety. So that's why I'm keep making reference to it in the context of the pandemic and and us being on lockdown and quarantine. So thinking about adults and thinking about children, because I think it's important to think about the various individuals that make up a family household. Um, Worry isn't just in our heads. When it becomes excessive, it can impact on us physically. When we feel anxious and it manifests in a physiological way, for adults, that can mean things like, constantly being on edge. So when you think about being very hyper vigilant, if you sort of think about the meerkats from Compare the Meerkat, when they're constantly on the lookout for things, constantly on the lookout for danger, that's the way in which worry and anxiety can manifest in us as adults. We can experience it can be experienced in muscle tension, aches and pains, excessively so. So we're not talking about the fact that you've got aches and pains because you sort of engaged in physical activity. We're just talking about you feeling quite worn down and feeling achy and painy. Um, Restlessness and an inability to relax. So apart from being on edge, even when you are expected to relax, it's really difficult to do so. Difficulty concentrating, so an inability to focus on one task at any given point, um, thoughts racing, things darting in your mind. That can also manifest as elevated heart rate. So even in a resting state, if you experience an elevated heart rate, that could be a manifestation of worry and anxiety. We also see that individuals can manifest with difficulty sleeping, and also from a sort of mental state, catastrophize in a lot of situations. So a plus 1 plus 1 does not equal to 2. 1 plus 1 equals to something else, and little situations can in their minds become catastrophized, and you think about the worst case scenarios. So that's not limited to, but those are some of the ways in which anxiety can manifest in adults. When you're thinking about children and young people, because children and young people don't always have the capacity to express themselves, to express what they're feeling, or to even understand why they're feeling it. Their level of anxiety may present in irritability. They may become tearful. They may seem more clingy to parents, even within the context of the lockdown. They're not going anywhere, but they feel like they're just following parents around, and they're clinging to parents, and you just don't understand why. They might experience difficulty sleeping, or they may get to sleep but then wake up and have lots of interrupted sleep. They may have loss of appetite. So they may just, their diet in terms of their interest in food may completely change. And you might, for younger children, you might see them just sort of become a bit more withdrawn but not really have an understanding of why. So with some younger children, it might be that they start to sort of play by themselves a little bit more, rather than interacting with family members or siblings. For the slightly older children, so you're thinking about sort of in terms of um, teens onwards, old teens onwards, it could present as angry outbursts. They could have lots of negative thoughts. It could present like, quite similar to the adults in terms of catastrophizing. With young people, it could present in the sense of like, bad things are going to happen. So like their response to every situation is something quite definitively negative. They struggle to see the light in the situation, and it might also manifest as confinement to oneself. So I know by nature teenagers like to sort of keep to themselves because family and parents might be deemed uncool, but this is a little bit more. So quite recognizable withdrawal, and sort of maybe staying in the room for much longer than they would do, not wanting to actually spend family time together, not wanting to sort of have dinner with family, not being very communicative can be indicators of a young person going through some level of anxiety and worry, but not necessarily knowing how to to communicate that to family, parents, or caregivers, and it presents itself in that way. So those are some of the ways. Those are not limited to, but those are some of the ways in which anxiety and worry can manifest and present itself in adults, children, and the older children. Within the context of um, the pandemic that we're in at the moment, I think, like I said, it's really useful to kind of hold those in mind because um, as parents, as caregivers, not only thinking about yourself, but you sort of maintain and look after the well-being of your home as well, to be mindful of and to kind of look out for triggers and be able to start conversations and ask questions that are not judgmental, but to kind of you're curious about what's going on for them. So if you pick up on something that's slightly odd, to actually explore and have a conversation and be open to hearing that child or young person and explore and just try to understand what's going on for them and with them, because it will give you some better understanding, and also it will put you in better stead to be able to deal with things and help them through what we're currently going through as well. Um, so in terms of so having talked about kind of how worry and anxiety can manifest, I would like to speak to you about practical tips to improving mental health and well-being, because I think overall that's where we all want to be. We want to have a toolkit that we can use, not just one thing, but a variety of things that we can use at a variety of different times that can help us to manage the difficult situation that we're in. I think the importance for me in terms of well-being and balance is to acknowledge the situation, but then be able to manage it within ourselves. And the first tip that I would say is to be able to separate what's in your control from what's not in your control. That's absolutely key, because if we try to work on things that are outside of our control, it's absolutely counterintuitive, and it's going to have an even more negative and compounded impact on our well-being and mental health. So for young children, for children and young people in the context of the pandemic, I think as parents and caregivers, it's really, really important that we have honest and open and age appropriate conversations with them about COVID-19. So giving them the facts. Age appropriate is the key here, what they need to know. And the reason that we encourage this, and there's a guidance that I've shared that PE will make available via link, psychological guidance, is that to stop young people and children being fed by information elsewhere. So one of the things that you can control as the parent in terms of, and this will impact on your well-being as well, is controlling the information and actually sharing what's right and accurate with your children in an age appropriate way, and having an honest conversation with them about that. Now, for yourself as an adult, you want to, what you can control are things like adhering to governmental guidance, maintaining social distancing, washing your hands. Out with of that, it's really difficult. You can't control what somebody else does. So to try and do so or to catastrophize based on somebody else's behavior is really, really unhelpful. What you can focus on is actually what Joe Bloggs is doing down the road. I can't control. If you're out getting shopping essentials and somebody's coming towards you and not maintaining social distance, rather than freaking out, what you can do, because what you have control over, is to then take the subsequent steps that need to maintain the social distance. Because what you've done in that situation is you've taken control, you've taken charge of what you're able to, and that helps you to regulate rather than thinking Joe Bloggs that's coming towards me is going to pass this on to me, and sort of catastrophizing the situation in that way. So that's number one. Given that a majority of us are working from home, and obviously with young people, the schools being shut to non-key workers, children, it's super important. Number two is to set a routine. Um, Most of the nation are expected to stay at home at the moment, so it's absolutely important. But equally create that structure for your children as well. So create times when they study and create the times when they're allowed to play. And it really helps to keep the family bonded. It helps to keep the family together, and it helps to keep the family within the expectations, because it links into number one, that you can control that timetable and you're controlling that boundaries and that structure. So it gives you that sense of autonomy rather than thinking about everything else that's going on in the world. Within your home, you're actually maintaining that autonomy within your home. Number three is to stay mentally and physically active. So this is again quite a really important one, in the sense that plan your within your daily timetable, include activities that keep both your mind and your body physically, your body active. So whether that is going for a family walk in the morning to sort of get the air rushing through your lungs, whether it's that you're actually going to do some physical exercise in the morning, something that works for you. But given that the children and young people have things that are available online to them as well. I was hearing Rogie talk about it last week, family time. That could be something that the family does together, the morning exercise to engage together. Um, but in terms of mental you can learn something new. There are lots and lots of resources out there at the moment. Free language courses, free developmental courses. Challenge yourself to something that you haven't done before that will actually get your mind and your brain thinking. Because um, what that then does is it gives you something to focus on, other than your normal routine, other than the things that you're comfortable with. If you are challenging yourself psychologically and mentally, it gives you a new task and it gives you a new sense of refocus. And so, doing something like that, I would say, in terms of physical activity, doing at least 30 minutes a day, that'll be really helpful for you physically, but also mentally. And with the physical, feel like you've got the tools in hand to deal with that, that's only going to make you feel worse. And it's only going to have a negative impact on you and the family, because family will pick up on it. So, part of challenging yourself to stay in the present is to notice sights, engage in your senses essentially. Notice sights, sounds, taste, and other sensory experiences in your immediate moment, and name them. So actively sort of actively name out to yourself, engage in a dialogue with yourself about what you can hear. What birds can you hear singing? What taste can can you taste in your mouth? What smells can you smell? And engaging in mindfulness activities is a really helpful, useful way to do that. Mindfulness activities and progressive muscle relaxation activities, which really help you to kind of pull things in from the outside back into yourself, become more grounded, become more in tune with what's going on with you and in your immediate surroundings. It's also a really great time to practice gratitude. So, at times of uncertainty, developing a gratitude practice is a really good way to help connect you with moments of joy and pleasure. And when we think about sort of theories and positive psychology, this is it's a way in which individuals are encouraged to kind of work at, rather than thinking about all the things that isn't going right, wrong, all the things that's going wrong, to think and refocus and reframe on some of the things that's going right. So I would encourage, being specific about the things that you're grateful for. Creating a gratitude jar, which is something that the family can do. So writing in there what you're grateful for on a daily basis and putting it in a jar, encouraging the family to be involved in that, because what that does is that's also a skill and a strategy that you're encouraging the children to learn. And by the end of the quarantine, you want to have a jar full of lots of things that you're grateful for, because actually, even though we're all on lockdown at the moment, there's still lots of great things that's going on with us. Um, and if you can't do a gratitude jar, then maybe start a gratitude journal as an adult. That's something that you could do and scribe in there. It could be something you do as an individual, but you could also do that with your spouse, and scribe in there. And to be able to, at the end of this journey, when we come out of the other side by the grace of God, to be able to look at it and see, actually, there's been lots and lots of great things that have happened, and it refocuses you as well. It's really, really difficult to um, to try and think about future catastrophes whilst presently thinking about things you're grateful for. So it interrupts that train of thought in terms of negativity as well. And one of the ones that I would also encourage, number 5, is about noticing your limits to worry triggers. So this is about discipline. Um, in a situation like this, with with the health situation and the pandemic, there's constant information being chucked at us, whether it be by news outlets or social medias. We as adults really need to gatekeep what's coming into our minds, what's coming into our spirits. So you want to do something that we call a timeline, and basically in the field of psychology, what we're doing is we're tracking it. So for some people, they know that after watching 15 minutes news, their heart rate starts to increase because after 15 minutes, everything, they can't take anymore. At that point, what we would be saying is, do not watch more than 15 minutes. When at 14 minutes, turn it off, limit yourself to only 14 minutes of news a day. Help yourself track what your triggers are and eliminate them. So if you know that going on social media is something that elevates your worry and elevates your anxiety, then limit it and be really disciplined about that. And when you remove that, replace it with one of the other strategies, so you're not just left sort of twiddling your thumbs, twiddling your fingers, feeling like you've got nothing to do. If you remove a trigger, I encourage you to replace it with one of the other strategies that we've talked about, so that the space is still filled, but it's filled in a positive way and in a way that you can control. Um, and for children as well, when we talk about you speaking with children and having those open dialogues, track it with them. If you're able to have an open conversation with your child or young person, and they're able to say to you, when this happens, I feel a little bit fearful, then come up with a plan together of how that could be removed, how that could be reduced, how that can be eliminated. It might be that actually it's something that you do that triggers your child. It might be something, a response that you have. So by being aware of that and having a conversation, you can change your behavior if it's one of the things that triggers your child, or you could be more mindful of it and really just kind of reframe how you respond and behave in the presence of your child, so that it doesn't trigger them off. But a conversation is really important about that. And also, staying connected and reaching out for more support. So I know we're isolated, but I want to just kind of say, for me, we're physically isolated. We're not emotionally, we shouldn't be emotionally isolated. We shouldn't be psychologically isolated. We shouldn't be mentally isolated. There are still ways in which we can maintain that human connection, this forum and this opportunity being one of them. So just because we're restricted and limited to being indoors doesn't mean that we cannot continue to develop and build on the relationships that we have. So I really encourage us to actively and be intentional about those. And I think for me, within my field and having to adapt the way in which we work, video conferencing is something that has become such a big deal now, and enables you to still have that connection. Yes, it's not physical, but have that connection, schedule it in so that people know and that it's something you can look forward to with your family. So whether it's that you're scheduling in a video conference with a friend that you normally would see regularly, then make that a video conference call that you have with them at the same time that you would have seen them when there was no COVID-19. And then it becomes regular and it becomes part of your routine as well. But also talking to friends, talking to the church community, talking to family about things you feel particularly anxious about, that can be really helpful, because when you talk it through, we start to realize actually some of the things that cause us fear and anxiety are irrational. And if we're able to have conversations about them, then those can be unpicked, and they could be rationalized a bit, and hopefully reduce the anxiety that we feel. And lastly, I just want to say at this time, it's really, really important that we remember to be kind to ourselves and to not beat ourselves up because we feel a certain way. We're not robots, and naturally, our emotions will be elevated and deplete at times, but we need to be kind to ourselves because we are looking after our family, and you need to ensure that you have a bandwidth to be able to do so. If you're running on fumes, caring for others is really tasking anyway. And if you've got depleted resources, then caring for others is going to be really, really difficult. And like I said, as adults, your mental health and well-being impacts on your surrounding, it impacts on your household, it impacts on your family. So one of the key things is you need to be good for your children to be good, for your family to be good. Um, so be really compassionate with yourself and reach out for help, because like P said, no man is designed to be quarantined or isolated, but that's only physically. make those emotional connections and don't feel like you can do it all by yourself. So those are my tips and strategies, just kind of practical ways in which to sort of help and maintain a healthy balance of mental health and well-being. I would say that if it got to the point whereby you felt debilitated, you felt that you just couldn't function, I would be advising and encouraging for to seek professional help and counsel. There's lots of avenues out there where they'll provide this provision for self-help programs and self-help material and resources. There's also elements of cognitive behavioral therapy that can be done, but that's if it gets to the point where it's hitting a clinical threshold and you cannot function any longer. However, in regards to the context and the anxiety that we're feeling with regards to COVID-19, some of these strategies would be helpful in terms of reducing that and still helping you to maintain a healthy balance to life. One of the things that I talked about was around sort of mindfulness and progressive muscle relaxation. So I'm just going to give you a quick taster of what that looks like, and I've left some resources that will be available for you to download also, but I'm also open to having conversations about it in the future, or to kind of practice it a little bit more with people. So just for the sake of just kind of the quick brief taster, I'm just going to ask you where you are to sit comfortably, get comfortable, and close your eyes if possible, please. So this calming breathing technique is for stress, anxiety, and panic. It only takes a few minutes and can be done anywhere. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to try and breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. Breathe in gently and regularly. And as you breathe, I'll count steadily from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Without pausing or holding your breath, let it flow out gently. 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I'm going to ask you to tighten and squeeze the area around your eyes. Squeeze it until you can feel the tension. Breathing in, 2, 3, 4, 5. And breathing out, release and unsqueeze and let the tension flow out. 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to ask you to keep breathing in. 2, 3, 4, 5. As you do, raise your shoulders up to your neck, tensing it, feel it tense. Hold it there, feel the tension. And as you breathe out, let your shoulders drop and feel the tension come out of it. 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to stop it there. I'm just going to ask you to come back to the room. And how that would work is you would work through your entire body, just feeling the tension with your breathing, becoming really aware of it, and breathing out and releasing the tension. Like I said, there's some materials for that, but I'm available to have conversations and to even practice with you if need be. Thank you very much.
Well done, girl.
No, thank you very much. Thank you, Mo. I have a question, and I'm sure a lot of people are listening and watching. If you have a question, please feel free to ask, and Pastor Mona will moderate that. You did say something here. You mentioned that what we do as parents can trigger anxiety in our children. Now, as a parent, I have 2 questions. First question is, how can I stop myself behaving or responding to in such a way that it can trigger anxiety in my child? How can I stop myself? How do I even know? Because I know that most parents don't want to hurt their kids.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how will a parent know that, you know what, this behavior right now, this reaction right now is affecting, will affect my child, and how can they stop themselves?
Mm-hmm.
And the second question will be, if I know that I have triggered anxiety in my child because of my behavior, how can I help that child?
Okay, thank you so much. Those are really, really good questions. And one of the things that I would say is that we really encourage open conversations with children and young people in the home. So it just takes adaptability to be able to do that. So obviously, how you would have a conversation with a 4-year-old is different to how you'd have a conversation with a 14-year-old. So I think in this kind of context, when we talk, this is a really, one of the benefits of this time is a really good time to sort of have conversations with children and young people about how they're feeling about what's going on, what their understanding is. Not only are we educating them as parents and caregivers, but you want to know what the lived experience of that child is. And so having a conversation and asking a young person and asking a child, are there things, be really open and be ready for feedback. Are there things that mummy and daddy does that makes you worry, and being able to receive that and hear it rather than chastise them for saying that, and asking them to break it down. So a really good way that I've encouraged parents to do that is to do like storyboards with young people. So actually drawing like a situation and saying how they felt about it, and then in the book, you're basically drawing a cartoon, a strip of a situation, how they felt about it, and then asking them, did anybody, did mummy or daddy, make that feeling come, or did mummy or daddy make that feeling worse or better? That's a really good way to gauge what your responses are and how they impact on your child. And then once you have an understanding of that and you're able to receive that, to actually validate what the child has said is really, really important, and say, I've heard what you've said, and I'm really sorry that that's how you felt. And mummy and daddy are going to go away and think about how to not make that feeling bigger for you, and are going to think about how to help you to make that feeling smaller, because it's really important that when you feel that way, you're able to come to mummy and daddy. And then for you as the parent to take on board what that child has said, really think about that storyboard and what they've said, how they said that you impact on that feeling being bigger or smaller, and then think about behaviorally, how can you change that? So whether it's that, you don't shout or scream or keep BBC News or CNN on for like 2 hours at a stretch and have like ongoing conversations, whether it's that you don't have adult type conversations about your fears around the children because they soak things in, you need to then think about what little changes you can make sure that your behavior isn't impacting on that child, and being really realistic with yourself. You can't change everything, but the small changes that you can make, that you're thinking about helping to reduce that feeling of fear that child has disclosed to you. So it's about being honest with the child, but also honest with yourself, and being open to correction and feedback and truthfulness from your child, really.
Okay. Thank you very much, Moji. Yeah, I have one other question.
Oh my God.
You mentioned that to identify and notice your limits. Now, I'm a pastor, and so just talking about myself now, you move from pastoring 1,200 people that you see every week, and all of a sudden, right, you can't see them, but you still have to pastor them. You can no longer preach. I can't preach. Up until now, you preach to people that you see. Now you have to preach to people that you don't see. Now we are in an unprecedented time, so nobody knows. So I find myself constantly checking. So what are others doing? Because when I have FOMO, I don't want to be left out. Number two, am I doing enough, or am I doing enough? Am I measuring enough? So and then sometimes I don't have the choice to find out. Okay, find out what other leaders are doing, and just by maybe visiting their pages, their social media pages, and yeah, and their YouTube accounts, and see what they're doing. So, of course, there are some of them I see, they trigger anxiety because I'm thinking, my goodness, how did you get there? I mean, like God told you about COVID-19. I mean, look at what you're saying. Like, how did you become an expert in COVID-19? No. So, and I must confess that sometimes I see some things on social media. My heart is just going. And I'm saying, like, did Jesus call a meeting of pastors and let me out? How come this guy has this on social media? Where did it come from? How do I, knowing fully well that I still have a job to do, right? How do I